Protect your DNA. BioPQQ can promote formation of new mitochondria. Infowarsstore.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Infowars Nightly News with me, your host, Paul Joseph Watson. Coming up tonight, Aaron Dykes talks to Clenard Childress to discuss the recent Planned Parenthood controversy and the truth behind the abortion industry. But our top headlines tonight out of Infowars.com. Bill Gates pours millions into geoengineering. This is also out of the Guardian newspaper with the headline, Bill Gates backs climate scientists lobbying for large-scale geoengineering. Microsoft founder Bill Gates continues to pour millions of dollars into high-risk geoengineering projects that purport to offer a solution to global warming, yet have been savaged by environmentalists as potentially posing a greater threat than climate change itself. Quote, concern is now growing that the small but influential group of scientists and their backers may have a disproportionate effect on major decisions about geoengineering research and policy, reports The Guardian, quoting critics who allege that Gates' funding has enabled geoengineering advocates to, quote, dominate the deliberations of the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And this investigation uncovers the fact that in one instance alone, Gates has funneled $4.6 million into the work of professors David Keith of Harvard University and Ken Caldeira of Stanford. And they, of course, are vehement proponents of injecting the upper atmosphere with sulfur particles to supposedly reflect sunlight. And then we study the side effects for human beings that sulfur exposure involves: reproductive failure, behavioral changes, damage to the immune system, as well as damage to the liver, heart, and of course, stomach disorders. So isn't it a fascinating coincidence that Bill Gates, whose financial support has bankrolled recent projects such as destroying sperm via ultrasound to make men sterile, the push to create vaccines in order to reduce the world's population, as Gates himself said at the 2010 TED conference, is now funding to the tune of millions of dollars geoengineering projects that threaten to cause reproductive failure in human beings. It's all part of the eugenics drive to sterilize men, which Gates is a vehement proponent of by his own statements and words. And we know that some form of mass geoengineering, of course, is already underway through the use of chemtrails, which this KSLA 2008 study, as we featured on many occasions, found that chemtrails were depositing toxic metals like barium into the atmosphere, which, when dissolved in water, can cause massive health problems. We recently had an interview with Skywatch chemtrail investigator Rosalind Peterson, who found that when these water samples were analyzed, they contained these toxic chemicals like barium. She was then able to make the correlation that when chemtrails were observed, these same toxic compounds were found in the water supply. So we've got Gates funding this massive expansion of geoengineering research. It's going directly to these scientists, lobbying governments to push for massive public funding, not just private, into geoengineering projects to inject the upper atmosphere with sulfur. So even as the latest figures document how the planet has not warmed since 1997, the effort to initiate man-made climate change in the form of geoengineering that we know for a fact will have a negative impact on the environment continues unabated, with the generous backing of the eugenicist Bill Gates. And this ties into another headline out of the New York Times. Activists fight green projects seeing UN plot. And basically this article talks about how mainly Tea Party people at the local level are becoming more and more suspicious about UN environmental moves and the fact that they're related to property seizures and other feudal measures to take over their local rights in their local area. So basically, the New York Times characterizes them all as weirdos believing in some outlandish UN conspiracy. But then a quote later on in the article actually admits that the foundation of their concerns are genuine. Quote, the protest date to 1992 when the United Nations passed a sweeping but non-binding 100-plus page resolution called Agenda 21 that was designed to encourage nations to use fewer resources and conserve open land by steering development to already dense areas. They have gained momentum in the past 2 years because of the emergence of the Tea Party, harnessing its suspicion about government power and belief that man-made global warming is a hoax. So while you've got the New York Times characterizing people who are concerned about this as weirdos, Bill Gates is funneling millions of his own dollars into geoengineering projects aimed at injecting the upper atmosphere with sulfur to supposedly fight global warming. Moving on to our next story, this is a major potential victory against the TSA. Infowars.com reports Senate to vote on bill that could kick TSA out of airports. Following House approval of the measure on Friday, the Senate is set to vote today on legislation that would allow the U.S. airports to replace TSA workers with screeners from private companies, a move that could spell the beginning of the end for the highly unpopular federal agency's role in airport security. Quote, the U.S. agency must allow airports to switch to private companies for screeners unless it can show the move wouldn't be cost-effective and would be detrimental to security, according to the legislation, which, if passed, will go to President Barack Obama for his signature, reports Business Week. And what we're talking about here is H.R. 3038, the Airport Security Options Act. That was the version passed in the House on Friday. It's expected to be approved by the Senate today. Now, you'll recall at the height of the TSA backlash, airports in increasing numbers started exercising their right at the time to kick out TSA screeners and replace them with private security. And of course, TSA Chief John Pistole put a stop to this in January 2011 by placing a freeze on the ability of airports to opt out of having TSA screeners. And it, of course, was around the same time that Texas had this big fight with the feds over trying to ban invasive pat-downs, which led to Homeland Security threatening to enforce a no-fly zone over the Lone Star State. So what this legislation will do, which is expected to be approved today, is once again allow, as if airports as private companies should have ever not been allowed in the first place, allow them to once again kick out the TSA and replace them with their own private security, which in the process will create tens of thousands of jobs for the private sector. Good news on all fronts. So should it pass, this is going to be a major victory against the TSA, and it could mark a watershed moment in getting the TSA out of the airports. And then maybe we can turn our attention to, the subways, the bus depots, the highways, and everywhere else where this occupying federal army of criminally and sexually deviant goons has set up their network of internal checkpoints. So great news there with the fight to get the TSA out of the airports. Steve Watson, Infowars.com headline, polls, half of Americans support attacking Iran. Two new polls ominously highlight that almost half of all Americans are willing to go along with attacking Iran in order to prevent the country from developing nuclear weapons. In a poll conducted by The Hill, 49% said military force should be used against Iran, with 62% of likely voters adding that they were somewhat or very concerned about Iran attacking the United States in a terrorist event. The poll found that just 31% did not approve of using military force, while 20% were undecided. So you've got two US warships just off the Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, another one on its way. Iran is getting ready to launch more war games in the Strait of Hormuz. And Iran has been told directly, if you dare lift a finger when Israel attacks, then the United States will have its pretext for joining in the attack. So you might not even need a staged Gulf of Tonkin-like attack, as Dick Cheney's office war gamed the potential for back in 2008. to launch yet another war. If Iran defends itself in any way, American interests suddenly are under attack, and the United States will merely be defending itself against the aggressor and will join in the war with Israel. That's how they've mapped it out. That's how they want it to go down. And so these polls show that half of the American people have forgotten, perhaps willingly, all about, weapons of mass destruction, Niger yellow cake, dodgy dossiers, and are willing to go along with it because, they're Giants fans and Iran are the Patriots or whoever, because, they're the opposition. They think of global warfare in the context of the Super Bowl, and not in terms of what it really will be, which is thousands of dead and maimed people, as we saw in Iraq. And if it escalates, potentially nuclear war on a global scale, if limited, but nuclear war nonetheless. Moving on to our next story. Did Madonna put on the greatest show on earth? Asks the Daily Mail. She declared she had to put on the greatest show on earth during the greatest show on earth, and Madonna certainly didn't disappoint. The singer, 53, put on an impressive performance during the halftime show of the NFL Super Bowl football game between the New York Giants and the New England Patriots. Impressive indeed, as the New York Observer notes, quote, most interesting for fans of Illuminati symbolism may be the detail that Madonna's halftime show improved upon the ratings of Bruce Springsteen's 2009 show by 20% and the Black Eyed Peas' 2011 show by 1%. So, New York Observer openly pointing out the fact that this was a complete exercise in Illuminati symbolism. Now look at these screenshots we've got from last night's Super Bowl performance by Madonna, and then you can also Google image search for yourself and type in Baphomet, and of course we see that Madonna is dressed up as Baphomet. She's sitting on the throne of Baphomet. She's got the horns. Later on, she's got the hand gestures of Baphomet, one hand pointing up, one hand pointing down in the Egyptian dance pose. And this is the idol that the American people during Super Bowl halftime show are being told to worship. So who's Baphomet? Baphomet is an idol used by Satanists to represent the devil. Or as Satanist Aleister Crowley once himself described it, quote, this serpent, Satan, he is the devil of the book of Thoth, and his emblem is Baphomet. And also, as historical depictions show, Baphomet was worshipped by the Freemason secret society, which, of course, at its highest level, swears an oath to Lucifer. So this is an ancient pagan deity, which is used by Luciferians and occultists to symbolize the devil. Madonna is dressed up as Satan during this performance. So you've got her dressed up as a demon prancing around on a stage embedded with an all-seeing eye with pyramids in the background. And then at the end, she's raised up on this pedestal while all the happy, clappy Christian gospel singers worship her. Right at the end, the words world peace appear on the stage. And then she's bowing down to the dark priest at the end and worshipping him. So, I mean, what's the message? That, worshipping Satan is the only way the Illuminati will allow us to have world peace? Or more simply, the American idiots half drunk watching the Super Bowl at halftime will never get any of this Baphomet jazz, so we'll just throw it in their face and have a good laugh. And then, to top it all off, afterwards, the news cycle is taken over by endless debate about how great the performance was and how this stupid dancer flipped off America, even as the world teeters on the precipice of 2 wars in the Middle East. This is what the Twitter buzz is all about. TiVo's talking about how many people played it back to watch it again, throwing it in our faces that they know everything about your viewing habits, not just what you watch when you watch it, but also each individual part that you watch again. Associated Press reports, quote, TiVo has 2 million customers in the US. Spokesman Tara Matra said the company would check to see if more people play back the moment. So they've got TiVo looking into that. Madonna prancing around dressed up as Satan, all-seeing eyes, pyramids, worshipping the dark priest as the Christians all bow down to Satan. He's going to bring us world peace. So all in all, truly, truly bizarre and perfectly illustrative of how the modern day Babylon system is the corporate entertainment system itself. And another outstanding reason why you should avoid it at all costs. Moving on to our next story on Infowars Nightly News. Mexican vote may determine future of drug war. This is out of the Washington Times. The frontrunner in Mexico's presidential race represents a party known for allowing drug trafficking cartels semi-autonomous control of certain regions during its rule in the previous century. The prospect of a victory by Enrique Pena Nieto of the Institutional Revolutionary Party in the July 1st presidential election has troubled U.S. policymakers about drug control efforts in Mexico. Over the past 5 years, the U.S. has backed the bare-knuckles war on drug cartels by President Felipe Calderon, who is barred by the Constitution from serving a second 6-year term. That's right, they've backed the bare-knuckles drug war by arming the very drug cartels, as we documented, as Cele Castillo has documented now in prison, like Los Zetas under the Fast and Furious program to bring drugs into America on ex-torture planes that routinely crash and dump out tons of cocaine. So it seems from this report that with this new president coming into office in Mexico, the CIA back channels that run the drug trade from that country are concerned about their usual business partners, who it comes out in court trials are actually working for the CIA, being surpassed by other drug cartels in the country. So it seems the CIA is very concerned about that at the moment. Moving on to our next story, Kurt Nimmo writes on Infowars.com, Ron Paul warns of Federal Reserve power grab. Not only was Obama's appointment of Richard Cordray to the misnamed Consumer Financial Protection Bureau unconstitutional, but the newly minted federal Leviathan itself is in direct violation of the Constitution, specifically the 10th Amendment. In January, Obama thumbed his nose at Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution. It states the president, quote, shall nominate and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate shall appoint officers to the government. But as Ron Paul notes in this new video, the new agency founded under the Federal Reserve-dominated Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act is itself an unconstitutional monster that will further degrade the financial health of the country. Cordray will act as a czar, answerable not to the American people, but his masters at the Federal Reserve, like EU or Soviet-era committee. The CFPB will be run by unelected commissars who will exercise extraordinary power. The agency is part of the Federal Reserve and its budget is not subject to congressional control or oversight. So here's that clip from Ron Paul talking about the latest advance in executive tyranny.
Current law already allows only the richest Americans to invest in potentially lucrative ventures such as hedge funds because such investments are deemed to be too risky for the average American to invest in. The government, in its paternalistic wisdom, treats American investors as too stupid to know what to do with their money and protects them, supposedly, by keeping them poorer than they otherwise would be. We can expect even more of this once the CFPB is running in full stride.
Now, that was just a segment of Ron Paul's latest speech on that new Federal Reserve controversy. We'll play the rest of that clip during the break. And coming up, Aaron Dykes talks to Clenard Childress to discuss the recent Planned Parenthood scandal and the truth behind the abortion industry, and specifically how it applies to black people. Childress is, of course, from the website Black Genocide. Now, we urge all our subscribers, our watchers on YouTube, because most people watch this on YouTube, to subscribe to prisonplanet.tv, because that's what funds the production of this program. We've currently got 1-year gift subscriptions available at a 37% discount for just $44.95. We got the free trial still running, so you can try prisonplanet.tv for 15 days completely free. And then if you don't want it, then you just don't renew. And if you leave it, then it does renew, and you get access to all the content, Alex Jones Show, video, audio files, Infowars Nightly News, speeches, special interviews, Literally 7 years of content, a massive back catalogue library of information war material. So we encourage all our subscribers to sign up at prisonplanet.tv.
Hello, this is Ron Paul with your weekly update for February 6th. Well, much has been made recently of the President's unconstitutional appointment of Richard Cordray to be Director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, CFPB. Lost in the hubbub has been any discussion of the unconstitutionality of or the need for the CFPB itself. Proponents of the CFPB claim that this new bureaucracy will help consumers by protecting them from fraudulent activity. In reality, it will only expose consumers to more financial harm. Housed within the unconstitutional Federal Reserve and funded not through congressional appropriations, but through the Federal Reserve's interest revenue off the trillions of dollars of U.S. government debt it holds, the structure of the CFPB ensures that it is run by unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats with no effective oversight from Congress. Given broad powers to regulate the activities not only of banks but also of any other entity which the government deems offers a financial product, there is almost no limit to the scope of financial activity which the CFPB can oversee. Giving impetus to the CFPB's creation was the poor reputation of Wall Street banks and financial firms that developed as a result of the financial crisis. Banks which received trillions of dollars of taxpayers-funded bailouts turned around and shafted their customers by foreclosing on homes, raising credit card interest rates, and introducing numerous new fees. But rather than keeping Wall Street in check, as its proponents allege, the CFPB will end up placing further restrictions on the ability of Main Street Americans to engage in productive financial endeavors. Current law already allows only the richest Americans to invest in potentially lucrative ventures such as hedge funds because such investments are deemed to be too risky for the average American to invest in. The government, in its paternalistic wisdom, treats American investors as too stupid to know what to do with their money and protects them, supposedly, by keeping them poorer than they otherwise would be. We can expect even more of this once the CFPB is running in full stride. The CFPB will further harm consumers by encouraging them to use only financial products which have received the Bureau's approval. Many consumers will assume that these products are safe and will fail to engage in their own due diligence with predictably unfortunate results. We have seen this with the stock markets in the cases of Bernie Madoff and Alan Stanford, where investors trusted the SEC to prevent fraud ended up suffering huge losses. Social Security is a similar case in which millions of people place their trust in the government to take care of them in their old age. The inability of Social Security to pay its future obligations is well understood but ignored, and millions of Americans will likely once again learn the hard way that the government cannot be taken at its word. Thanks for calling this update. A new update is placed on this number, 888-322-1414, every Monday. The written text can be found on my website, www.house.gov/Paul, under the heading Texas Straight Talk. Thanks for calling.
Yeah, I'm signing these evil 1776 flags. Doesn't get any more out of control than that, ladies and gentlemen. It's pretty un-American what we're doing here at Infowars.com. I mean, not only are we promoting liberty, but we're selling 1776 flags. Now that is Al-Qaeda.
And we are back from break. Thanks to Paul Joseph Watson for doing the news segment. We're joined now by the founder of blackgenocide.org and president of the Life Education and Resource Network, acronym LEARN, Dr. Clenard H. Childress Jr. to discuss the whole controversy over Komen and the race for the breast cancer cure and their entanglement with Planned Parenthood and that whole recent controversy over funding. So with that in mind, we turn now to Dr. Childress. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
So could you give us your overall impression first of this whole controversy? People have found out, perhaps for the first time, that when they donate a few dollars here or there, when they're shopping with all these corporate partners, that money to go to breast cancer research may actually be going, at least in part, to Planned Parenthood.
Well, roughly, I believe it was around $600,000. But when you have $1 billion budget, it is, of course, it may appear to be small for Planned Parenthood, but it's indeed the principle, because the Komen Foundation is concerned about breast cancer. And I've been sharing across the country that there have been defectors from the American Cancer Institute that now truly say they are quite aware that there is a direct link between abortion and breast cancer. So it gets to be a position of principle. If you're concerned about breast cancer in women, there's no way in the world any money should be going to Planned Parenthood that accounts for 25% of all the abortions in this country. So they're in the abortion business, and it is a part of their ideology. And if Komen's ideology is to preserve women and to save women from breast cancer, they're on two different ends of the spectrum, and there should be no joining or support.
And it's a whole, I disagree in general, actually, with this whole putting all your energy into one basket, that one kind of corporate-driven sponsorship is going to cure any one thing. But it's all the worse when some of their corporate partners are so controversial, whatever your position might be out there in the audience on the pro-life, pro-choice issues. Why get those two beds entangled? I mean, why not keep it a separate issue? I mean, Planned Parenthood, even if you're going to have abortion services, ought to be closed just for its racist and eugenics past. I know that's something you've covered. And so it's just amazing that this controversy comes to the fore with Planned Parenthood under investigation. Your thoughts, Doctor?
I think unquestionably these things are good. It's going to create a dialogue. It's going to enlighten some people. But Planned Parenthood is a diabolical organization. Right now, they're under investigation of the feds for improper use of government money. I think to the tune, every year they get roughly around 329 million taxpayer dollars. But the simple fact of the matter is that abortion is not good for women. Abortion is a direct link to breast cancer. Mm-hmm. And as we were sharing earlier, in the African American community, we make up 12% of the population, but 37% of the abortions. And with abortions being the most performed operation on a woman, you're going to have a rise in breast cancer, which can be sociologically documented that has been the case. In the African American community, many people don't know breast cancer was not an issue. But since 1973, basically the leading cause of death in the women in their 40s is breast cancer, and it's second in their 50s. So this is unprecedented. It is simply because abortion being the most performed operation on a woman that you have seen this dramatic rise in breast cancer.
Yeah, it's incredible. And for them to ignore those links is disgusting. But I've monitored a number of blogs and news reports about this whole Komen Planned Parenthood controversy, and there's a lot of denial that there is such a link, that it's some kind of rumor or myth. And just as a parallel, there's also the issue last October where Komen was denying the bisphenol A link to breast cancer. They actually on their blog refused to acknowledge that there's a link there, even though there's been countless studies of the estrogen mimicker BPA and its at least contributory cause to breast cancer. So are they really interested in finding this cure? That's a question that's out there.
Well, I think Komen really needs to come in examination just for any affinity with Planned Parenthood. Especially, we just shed a little bit of light of it, and I'd like to be able to talk more in depth, but the fact of the matter, African Americans, when they contract breast cancer from an induced abortion, the cancer that develops is far more aggressive than if it would have been from any other means. And so we're seeing breast cancer literally ravaging the African American community, women, and of course overall because of what abortion does to a woman's body. So we need to, all this needs to be exposed. I'm happy for this to have happened, that people are challenging this affiliation, because it's going to cause people to investigate. But I'm also outraged, should be outraged, and everybody should be outraged, that Yale School of Public Health now says they're not going to have any affiliation with Komen for having, when they first retracted their grants. Barbara Boxer said this is like the age of McCarthy. I mean, this is an outrage, and we have to understand and when Yale University begins to draw the line in the sand, isn't institutions of learning supposed to be the marketplace of ideas and exchange? Mm-hmm. I'm now condemned because I don't believe in your position on abortion, your position on choice. We, Christians, people of faith, need to stand up, and at least those who care for women's health, whether you're a Christian or not, should expose these evils. And this is all about ideology, but it's more about money.
Well, I think everyone's obviously interested in cutting breast cancer rates. The question is this how you do it? And do we really know where our money goes when you donate money to such a large organization that they could have these umbrella ties to something as controversial and repugnant as Planned Parenthood?
You're right. And I think, first of all, this is about principle. If I'm supporting Komen, and of course, I think every American should support any institution that is concerned with this devouring condition that is now very prominent in all of America, but especially with minorities, African American women. But we have to understand that this is the season that abortion is business. It is politically run. It supplies a lot of money to campaigns. Barbara Boxer needs to keep her mouth shut. Mayor Bloomberg heard what had happened, and he offered $250,000 to Planned Parenthood. This is absurd. It's crazy. And I pray that people become outraged and really begin to look at this. Yes, there's those in it to see abortion as very lucrative. I often say if abortion was not lucrative, it would not be legal. But no doubt this is the ideology of Planned Parenthood. And anyone who's supporting the ideology of targeting minorities for abortion and the mindset of population control is basically, that's racism, and we need to divorce ourselves from any institution and certainly withdraw our support from anyone that's aiding and abetting this.
Well, if you're going to extend that to eugenics, that's quite a large divorce from a large sector of society. But what about this Planned Parenthood Komen thing as a political wedge? You've just mentioned so many figures on the Democratic left coming out in support of them providing grants to Planned Parenthood. A lot of Republicans on the right coming out on the pro-life issue. Is it a good thing for this to come up in the political cycle? I mean, you pointed out so many African Americans who've put themselves under the Democratic tent refuse to look at this issue because of a lot of the political blinders placed at the top. What will this issue help drive the truth of the issue more into the general population?
I pray it does. That's my greatest frustration of anybody in this work that sees how the Democratic Party is totally in bed with the abortion industry. You saw that in the health care plan, where indeed abortion was the health care plan was just a guise of the Freedom of Choice Act. This president is determined to have taxpayer abortions. He's ignoring the Hyde Amendment. He wants to circumvent that and have his own view of eugenics forced upon this nation. And so we see now he has repealed the Freedom of Conscience Act. In other words, if you're going to be a doctor, you better learn how to do abortions. We have to basically have all these things exposed. African Americans need to know, and when it's all said and done, they're getting the worst of this. It is not a service to women. It's a disservice. It is hurting women. It is hurting them psychologically, physiologically, and socially. So we have to understand now that any time that something like this surfaces and comes to the forefront, we can gain from this lessons of this entrenched eugenics in this society. And this government basically does not believe in we the people. They're enforcing their ideology on the society. And African Americans need to wake up and know that they're getting the worst of it. And so we need to challenge the Congressional Black Caucus. We need to challenge the NAACP. We know you're getting money from the abortion industry or the population control entities. We know you're getting money, but you're also wise enough to know what it's doing to the community. So they become very much elitist in mindset, and they're ignoring their first responsibility, that is to represent the people. And the black clergy, some of them, and all of the Congressional Black Caucus, most of them are just representing themselves. It's a disconnect. So if I can get the story of Coleman on my website and other people can get this story out, it will help educate the public. And that's why, indeed, I look at this as a godsend, and hopefully it'll wake some people up.
Yes, sir. And because they've said this whole link between abortion and breast cancer is a myth, can you specifically point us to where we can find more research, where people out there can learn about the reality of this for themselves?
You know, sometimes I live in a vacuum. I think everybody's reading the same stuff I'm reading. Folks, go to blackgenocide.org. Look at the American Cancer Society exposes. You know, it's a story about those who have now defected from or no longer attached to the American Cancer Institute, I believe it's called. And they will tell you, they know there's a direct link between abortion and breast cancer. I mean, there's independent studies, and they're so much suppressed by the mainstream and, you know, the departments of education, which have become so secularized and so controlled politically. But first and foremost, the American Cancer Society or Institute knows it, and they have censored it, and we should be outraged as a people. I try to talk about it as much as I can, but we need to know this. And so there is a link. It can be definitively proven, empirically proven, scientifically proven, and we need to, as citizens, begin to rise up and demand the Colemans to stop the charade. If you're caring about breast cancer, you can't let a dime go to the leading abortion provider in this country. It's an oxymoron. It's ridiculous. So I'm thankful once again that programs like this and stories like this are coming to the forefront.
Well, people should read those studies for themselves. I'm outraged at the institutional silence in general. I mean, by way of parallel, it came out last week that a group of the staff at the FDA were trying to warn about the risk of a certain medical device the FDA was about to approve, and the FDA's response was to spy on their own employees and try to target them for dismissal. And so that's what you get from whistleblowers inside institutions. So it's good that this information's out there. It's bizarre and appalling that there's so much institutional silence, but I hope people will go to blackgenocide.org and read about those studies for themselves.
Well, I thank you for pointing that out. And folks, this is big business for most. It's money for most. For the candidates, for the political entities, for the NAACPs, the National Action Committee, Sharpton's, the Rainbow Coalition with Jesse Jackson. It's about money for them. But when it comes to population control entities and the people who are truly behind the Planned Parenthoods, it's an ideology. And they are targeting minority babies. And we need to understand that that is racism, and we also need to understand that that's diabolical and it's murder. And God cannot bless this nation as long as we have laws that basically allow us to kill our most vulnerable.
Doctor, we'll leave it there for today, unless you wanted to add anything else, and we appreciate you joining us.
Oh, I appreciate this program. Thank you for having me. And of course, this has been a blessing to our ministry, I want to say. And I pray that the people that hear this ask themselves, what is my role and how can I stand up? It is still, until it gets worse, we the people. And so we the people need to rise up.
Yes, sir. And again, your website's blackgenocide.org. And is there a website for the Learn activism?
Yes, learn.inc. .org, and also you can go to listen to go to my website, theurbanprophet.org, and listen to Eve Silver. Find that program under programming, and you can hear about the depths of breast cancer and abortion. She's a breast cancer survivor, and she's also studied and a counselor and a physician, and she knows that today she is marred because of an abortion. And so these people are getting out and telling the story. That's theurbanprophet.org. Did an interview with Eve Silver. Love for your listeners to listen to that.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
And that's all for tonight's Infowars Nightly News, but we will leave you with a quote of the day from Benjamin Disraeli. For you see, he says, the world is governed by very different personages from what is imagined by those who are not behind the scenes. And that's it for our program tonight. We hope you join us again tomorrow. Stay tuned to Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.tv and keep spreading news about the Infowars Nightly News.